you had to decide who lives or dies based on nothing more than a few physical traits someone may or may not have? What if getting it wrong meant death? Not just for them, but possibly for you too. On the surface, No I'm Not a Human is a psychological horror game about sheltering strangers in a post-apocalyptic world, but it's so much more than that. So today, I'd like to discuss how this game explores morality and what's right and wrong in this world. Warning, this video contains opinions that may or may not align with your own. Please be kind to everyone in the comments when discussing. Also beware of spoilers for No I'm Not a Human. No I'm Not a Human was created by independent Russian game development studio Triaskas. The demo for the game was originally released in June of 2025, but we actually got a glimpse into this world way before that, back in August of 2024, when a prototype for the game was featured in the Violent Horror Stories Anthology, a collection of 4 short horror-themed games made by different developers. Triaskas promised an extended version of this game, a promise which they kept, with the game releasing on September 15th of 2025. The premise of the game is rather simple at first glance, but there is so much more to it beyond the surface level. With the sudden and rapid rise in solar activity afflicting Earth with blinding light and unbearable heat during the daytime, as well as the projected temperatures continuing to rise, citizens are advised to adapt to a nocturnal lifestyle. During the night, those strange creatures known as visitors begin to emerge, donning the appearance of humans in order to seek out and kill their victims. With the world falling into chaos, it is up to you to take in those who have been displaced by recent events, needing to ensure that you're only letting humans into your home. But with little to no information on these visitors, your only way of differentiating between the two is based on physical characteristics that act as circumstantial evidence at best. With such an interesting concept, it's no wonder the game has blown up in the way that it has. Now that we have an understanding of the premise, let's discuss the actual game for a bit. We open up with a softer rendition of the main musical motif that can be heard throughout the game. As we listen on a phone call between our protagonist and his neighbor, it's revealed that we, the protagonist, are a bit of a shut-in, following some sort of uncomfortable situation to discuss. Later in the game, through exploring the protagonist's home, it's implied that perhaps he lost his wife, leading him to a life of self-isolation. Over the phone, the neighbor says he'll come by later that night, and afterwards we immediately cut to that evening, with a neighbor knocking at our front door. He brings with him revelations about the reality of our situation, shattering the peaceful life we had for a brief moment. As we discussed a moment ago, it's revealed that the rapid increase of solar activity has left the world uninhabitable during the daytime, with the sun being so intense that simply looking outside can burn your eyes from your sockets. People are being advised to stay in their homes during the day as the government works on a solution, but with so many people displaced from their homes, local homeowners are expected to provide shelter for those less fortunate. On top of this global warming disaster, your neighbor also tells you about these reports of strange creatures emerging from the ground known as visitors. These visitors take on the form of humans in order to get into others' homes, making it important to distinguish between humans and visitors when sheltering civilians. One might wonder why you wouldn't simply bunker down alone in the safety of your home, but visitors are much more likely to attack individuals, making it unsafe to stay alone. With all of that in mind, our protagonist goes to sleep for the night with his neighbor staying as well. The next night, the neighbor's daughter comes by asking if her father is still there. She expresses her concerns about the situation and how weird everything feels as of late, but she's looking forward to spending more time with her family at home. Her father then takes her back to his house, leaving our protagonist alone in our home, allowing the actual game to begin. The gameplay itself is rather simple. Every night, a varying number of people will appear at your door. Whether to let them in or not is for you to decide. Once inside, they'll make themselves comfortable in your home, settling into one of the available rooms: the bathroom, living room, bedroom, office, kitchen, or storage room. With every day that passes, you'll learn more and more about these visitors and what signs to look out for in them through the news, courtesy of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. This includes common traits such as perfectly white teeth, dirty fingernails, bloodshot eyes, and many more vague symptoms. While these traits in people may indeed point to them being visitors, they can also be seen on completely normal humans as well, with even the protagonist exhibiting some of these features. I'd also like to point out that potential visitors will not usually have every single one of these traits, but rather a mix of signs that point to them being human or a visitor. During the day, you will have limited energy to get to know your guests better, using it to check physical characteristics that may reveal their true identity as a visitor. If you find yourself suspicious of anyone staying in your home, you hold the right to shoot them on sight, a decision that should not be taken lightly. Let's run a little scenario real quick. If these two individuals approached your door, who would you be more likely to let in? The elderly woman or the man in the hazmat suit? I showed several people a dozen characters from the game and asked them who they would let in if they found themselves in this situation. These two characters received the same answer from everyone I asked. The elderly woman was always allowed in, whereas the man was always turned away. But why exactly is this? I believe this could partially be because there is a common perception that senior citizens are weaker, but also wiser. Historically, older people were leaders of tribes and communities. Thus, that information and innate trust in older individuals has been passed down through generations. Think about how common the idea of respecting one's elders is. This could explain why they were more likely to trust the elderly woman. Another factor I will consider is that I did mostly ask women in my test, as I have very few guy friends. Some studies show that women are more likely to trust another woman who is a stranger over a man, and I must admit, I feel the same. This could explain why the elderly woman was let in every time, as she is not only perceived as a safer option due to her age, but is more trustworthy by default due to her shared gender with most of my friends. But here's what's really interesting. The elderly woman was a visitor, whereas the man was human. At a first glance, it's impossible to know whether someone is actually a visitor or not. Now, this test to see who they'd let in was not the only test I conducted on my poor friends. I also presented them with a list of traits identified as signs someone is a visitor by FEMA, and offered them photographs of the guests in our home. I showed my friends 6 characters, one being a visitor and the rest human in this scenario. Now, before we discuss those results, let's review the traits one may have according to FEMA. There are several traits that one may have that can be used to identify them as a visitor, much more than what I listed earlier. These include perfectly white teeth, dirty fingernails, bloodshot eyes, hairless armpits, black patches in aura photos, insects inside the ears, bleeding gums, skin irritation, rapid pupil movement, and fungal under the armpits. Now, some of these seem more telling than others, right? When I first began my research into this game and discovered the Aura camera, a device that can literally capture someone's aura in a Polaroid, I thought it would be a surefire way to know if someone's a visitor. But I was wrong. Over time, I found all of these traits to be unreliable in determining who is or isn't a visitor, with the evidence being circumstantial at best. Now, back to that second test I mentioned before. We're going to go through the characters I presented to my friends and see how often they were spared or shot. I selected 6 random characters from the game, one of which I kept anonymous for this test. The only trait I did not tell my friends about was the rapid eye movement, as it's a bit hard to capture that in a screenshot. So let's test each character's physical traits against a list. In many of the Let's Plays I watched while doing research, people often shot those who had 3 or more traits, so let's follow that logic. Our first subject is the Immortal Man. He has 5 of the traits often associated with visitors, including perfectly white teeth, hairless armpits, dirty fingernails, skin irritation, and even insects inside his ear. Using this logic, I'd say it's safe to assume he's a visitor, but when looking at his aura photo, there aren't any black patches. Something that, as I said earlier, I initially believed would be the best method for differentiating between humans and visitors. Now, despite the photo, following the idea of 3 or more traits deeming someone a visitor, he would fail the test. Next, we have the Sun Guy, who had perfectly white teeth as well as skin irritation. Though his yellow eyes are a bit alarming, they're not an official trait of visitors, so we'll let it slide. With that being said, he has only 2 traits, so I suppose we'll let him live for now. Up next, we have the Surgeon, who has 3 traits associated with being a visitor: perfectly white teeth, hairless armpits, and even black patches in his aura photo. Given that he has 3 traits, we'll consider him a liability and shoot him. Our next subject is the Parentless Teenager. Due to her wearing nail polish, we can't actually see if her fingernails are dirty, sadly, but she does have perfectly white teeth and bleeding gums. Since that's only 2 of the traits though, we'll let her live for now. Next up, we have Wireface, who had only 1 trait: bleeding gums. With just this in mind, he gets to live another day. And we'll get to the last character I presented to my friend shortly. So with all of those traits in mind, we would have eliminated 2 out of the 5 characters. But how many of those were actually visitors? After my friends gave me their answers, I revealed that only 1 character I presented to them was actually a visitor: the Immortal Man. I expected that all of my friends would choose to shoot him, given that he has the most traits out of anyone I showed them. But only half of them actually did. I'd like to shout out my friend Satori, who actually wrote notes on why she made the decision she did when going through these characters, and specifically point out her reasoning for passing him. To justify the roach in his ear, she wrote, and I quote, "possibly homeless, hence the roach." I'm sorry, what? Ma'am, this man is not homeless. He has 5 traits of being a visitor, the most out of anyone I showed my friends, and yet this is who they let live? Wow. In comparison, I also showed my friends the Surgeon, like we discussed, someone who had only 3 traits compared to the Immortal Man's 5. Yet this man was shot by every single person I asked, with no exception. Here are the results of my experiment. The Immortal Man, Sun Guy, and the Parentless Teenager were all shot by half of my friends, despite most of them only having 2 of the traits associated with visitors. The Surgeon was obviously shot by everyone, like I said before, but what surprised me was that only 1 person shot Wireface, ironically enough, one of the same people who spared the Immortal Man. So what exactly does this tell us? What was the point of all this rambling about a random experiment with my friends? Well, first of all, it reveals that not only were my friends looking for the listed traits from FEMA, but they were also taking the overall demeanor of the characters into account as well. If that had not been the case, the results would have been much different. With that in mind, have you ever heard of the halo effect? The halo effect is a cognitive bias in which a single positive trait or impression of a person influences how we judge other unrelated characteristics. For example, if someone is considered physically attractive, we may automatically also perceive them to be trustworthy. To simplify this, it's what many people would call pretty privilege, with those deemed more desirable often being seen as unable to do wrong. Some research shows that this can also not only apply to those with more youthful facial features, but also to elderly individuals. This could explain not only why, between the elderly woman and the man that has been sued earlier, everyone chose to let in the elderly woman, but also the results of our second experiment. The immortal man, despite being the most suspicious and having more traits of being a visitor than anyone, was spared significantly more often than the surgeon, someone with almost half the amount of traits. When I asked my friends why they all chose to shoot the surgeon, the most common answer I got was that he was simply unnerving. This reveals that we are not just basing our decisions off of the traits they have, but their appearance as well. Now, let's discuss the last character I presented to my friends. I actually kept this character anonymous, but here are the traits they had. Perfectly white teeth, dirty fingernails, fungal under the armpit, and bloodshot eyes. So with all of that in mind, they would also be considered a visitor by our 3-trait rule, right? Well, we're wrong! And we have not just shot any human, but actually ourselves. This character is none other than the protagonist. You see, the dirt under his nails can be explained from the digging in the basement, the bloodshot eyes from drinking caffeine, the teeth from basic hygiene, and I honestly don't have a way to explain the fungus under his arm. That's just some apocalypse stuff, I guess. But the point is, we know he's human, and yet he's also showing several traits of being a visitor. So what does that mean? Well, this experiment has shown that having 3 or more traits does not guarantee someone is actually a visitor. Yes, we shot the immortal man who was a visitor, but we also shot 2 humans, including ourselves in this hypothetical. The protagonist was the only other character that every single friend of mine chose to shoot beside the surgeon. Another interesting thing I noticed was that sometimes the human versions of characters will actually have more traits than the visitor version. I don't believe I've explained this yet, but a majority of the characters are randomized throughout the game, meaning they may be a human during one playthrough but a visitor in the next. I made a spreadsheet to calculate how many traits each character may have as a human versus a visitor. I found that on average, visitors have about 3 traits, meaning our earlier estimate of using 3 traits as a cause for concern was not too far off. The average for humans was only about 2 traits, but that doesn't mean that's always the case, with there being some characters who had 3 or 4 traits even. Something else I noticed when comparing the numbers was that some characters show more signs of being a visitor when they're actually a human, such as the taxi driver who had perfectly white teeth, dirty fingernails, and bloodshot eyes as a human, but only hairless armpits as a visitor. It's interesting to see how completely irrelevant these physical characteristics pushed by FEMA actually are in determining who is and isn't a visitor. So how exactly is all of this relevant? Well, it reveals how our protagonist discriminates against other people based on physical traits that they may or may not have. These people's lives are in our hands, and we are basing whether they deserve to live or die on a few traits that we can't even verify actually prove anything. We ourselves even have those same traits. FEMA has provided us with unreliable information, one might even say propaganda to cause infighting amongst the remaining humans, which has led to the dehumanization of our fellow survivors. One way that the game dehumanizes everyone is through the lack of names for any of our characters, with everyone being referred to by arbitrary labels based on single characteristics that they happen to embody. These characters are named things like Coat Guy, Cashier Girl, Widow, Soup Guy, etc. By simplifying these people down to nothing more than a single trait and in a sense flanderizing them, we can dehumanize these people, making it easier to look at them as an obstacle we need to overcome rather than a real-life person whose life we may be ending for our own protection. No matter how these characters respond to us, the game makes it very clear that it is us or them. During the game, you may even find yourself being accused of being a visitor. On the 8th night of the game, a character known as the Vigilante will appear at your door, simply engaging in small talk, as he's not actively looking for shelter. He will return again on the 10th and 12th nights of the game, demanding proof that you yourself are not a visitor, a test which you can fail if you exhibit any of the traits we discussed earlier. Say you've drank caffeine or dug in the basement throughout your run. Good luck, because he's going to shoot you now. This kind of misinformation and propaganda being spread by FEMA throughout the game only serves to make people more paranoid, turning civilians against each other and creating division. People are paying with their lives for traits that are out of their control, especially given the current circumstances of it being the literal end of the world as they know it. God forbid someone has red eyes from crying, because those bloodshot eyes are now a sign that you're a visitor, and you're going to die for it. Throughout the game, we find ourselves in a position where others' lives are in our hands, something that is not taken lightly by the game. I'm not going to get into all of the endings today, but one that I found very interesting was ending number 7, titled Yes, I Am a Murderer. This ending can be achieved when you kill at least 3 human guests in just one day. Something I did not mention earlier was that the game will actually tell you if the people you've killed were actually human or not. If someone is a visitor, upon shooting them, their body can be seen as a bloody mess where they stood, and if they were human, they will instead lay a body bag where they were. I actually wish this weren't the case, as I personally feel that the anxiety of not knowing would only add to the dread of the game, but I can see why they made the decision to go in the direction they did. Anyway, upon killing 3 guests, you'll get the murderer ending like I said, resulting in this message. Dying is terrifying. I know that well. The dread alone can drive you mad. Fear can drive you mad. It pushes you towards terrible choices. I can see the plans they had laid out for you. Fate had plans for you. Yet seeing what lay ahead only makes things worse. What was it that scared you so? Pain, fading away? You can't stop it. It will happen anyway, sooner or later. But you choose sooner. In this ending, the guilt of taking the lives of other humans consumes you, leading to your attempted suicide, but unable to go through with it, the other guests take it upon themselves to help you, throwing you out of your own home, beaten and bloodied. With no strength left, you're left to burn alive in the sun with only yourself to blame. But is it truly your fault? The government told you to trust no one, but you had no choice but to welcome others in, as visitors are less likely to attack those with numbers on their side. Weren't you simply trying to protect not only yourself, but the other people staying in your home? That's the thing about this game. We're not inherently wrong to suspect that these people in our home may not be who they say they are, but to judge them solely off of common traits that even we ourselves have is simply cruel. It was our decision to take their lives. A very interesting case in this game can be seen with the cashier girl. She is the second character to appear on the second night, and similar to the Immortal Man, she is always a visitor, showing 5 traits: perfectly white teeth, dirty fingernails, bloodshot eyes, fungal under her armpits, and insects inside her ear. Unlike some of the others though, she's actually not even aware that she herself is a visitor, discovering this at the same time as you. She pleads for her life, asking if she can at least shut her eyes before you shoot her. This interaction with the cashier girl adds a whole new element to things. We've been encouraged by FEMA to see these visitors as otherworldly beings, inhuman. They don't deserve our pity or the chance to live, but Cashier Girl's characterization completely contradicts those ideas. You could say that she only said those things out of desperation, but if you allow her to stay in your home, she will never bring harm to any other guest, simply staying there in peace. So is it fair to take her life as a visitor even though she has no ill intent? Does her status revoke any right to life she may have had? These are all questions we must ask ourselves when playing. Overall, the choices you make in No I'm Not a Human are much more nuanced than one might initially expect. While it may seem black and white, deny and shoot visitors, house and protect humans, there is so much more to it than that. In a world where survival demands judgment, No I'm Not a Human poses an uncomfortable question. What if the monster was never them, but was always us? I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you agreed or disagreed with anything I said, so please feel free to leave a comment. If you want to support the channel, consider liking and subscribing. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, and if you're watching this just before bed, sleep tight. Bye!